we actually find ourselves on an organic spaceship. I always attempt to point out to people, don't make a distinction between Earth and space. Don't say going into space. We are in space. We've always been in space, and we will always be in space. The Earth is our spacecraft. And if we destroy its capability to function, we're going to find ourselves adrift in a vast and lonely cosmos.
Hello, everyone. This is the Space Cafe podcast, and I'm Markus. So this is going to be the first episode. No, not the first episode. The first part of a two-part episode about a very special person. And I've never done a two-parter. Now being in episode 143, seems like this is now something special. And truly it is. Today with me on the show is no other than Frank White. And in the very unlikely case that you've never heard of Frank White before, he's the one who coined the term the overview effect. And the overview effect is all about getting a different perspective on our home planet Earth if you're outside the planet. So astronauts are the most likely folks who get to have that experience. And everyone who comes back to Earth has the same answer how they feel about Earth. They see Earth as a fragile, special place in the universe, where the universe even wonders about itself, I guess, because it has come up with something truly remarkable, human beings. And so this overview effect has stirred up quite a bit of discussion on a global scale. And I'm super excited today to have Frank White with me in the studio so we can chat about anything and everything overview effect. And the fun thing is, Frank White has never been to space and has reshaped how we understand ourselves on this planet. So without further ado, let's go. Let's kick this off. Welcome, Frank White, to the show. Is it true that you did write a letter to Wernher von Braun at some point?
It is true. Yes, that is true. I did.
How old were you back then?
I was probably 12 or 13.
Did your parents know about that?
Oh, yeah. So it kind of made sense because I'd gotten into astronomy earlier. And then when Sputnik was launched, I became fascinated with rocket science and attempted to launch rockets in my front yard.
You're kidding me.
Which, no, they all failed. They had no chance of success, to be honest. But I lived in Mississippi, and Wernher von Braun was in Alabama. It was actually within the realm of possibility to drive over to where he was and see what he was doing. I wrote a letter, and it was basically, how do I become a rocket scientist? And he wrote back, and he said, you should study math, science, engineering, chemistry, physics. And that was the end of that career because I did not want to study any of those subjects. I always did well in school. I did well in sciences and math, but it wasn't my thing. And so it was a very helpful letter because essentially it told me that was not my career.
Wow.
And
was it?
Yeah. So,
what was the letter handwritten or written on a typewriter?
it was on a typewriter. And I mean, as I recall, it was a handwritten signature. And I'm pretty sure I have no idea where it is.
But you may have it still.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the main thing is I was encouraged. I got an answer. I mean, I wasn't ignored. It was a fairly long letter. and it dealt with my ask. I mean, he paid attention to my request. He sent me a lot of pictures of rocket scientists in Huntsville, Alabama. And they all had the white shirts and the little black ties and, the shirt protectors in their pockets and lots of pens. And yeah, I actually had in mind that I was going to take these pictures to school and I was going to show my fellow students that rocket scientists weren't all nerds. But that didn't work out.
Did you?
Did you? They look just like a rocket scientist.
Did you tell your STEM teachers about that letter?
I don't recall doing that, but I'm quite sure I did. Yeah, I'm sure I did. And actually, what I was going through was not rare. I was not the only kid, the only boy anyway, attempting to launch rockets. I mean, we all caught the bug of rocketry, and we all wanted to do it. And I've talked to other people about it who are close to my age, and it was kind of common. And my parents didn't want me to do it. They figured I was going to blow a hand off or something. And again, eventually I gave up because realistically, there was no way to get the materials I needed. I mean, my friends and I were mostly using, we were taking apart fireworks and using, I guess, gunpowder. And we probably would have blown a hand off eventually. Wow. So, actually, after that letter, I didn't have so much interest anymore.
Interesting, but it did leave a lasting impression on you.
It did.
So it did. Even a negative reply left a lasting impression on you. So this is interesting.
Right. And actually, I mean, I didn't lose any interest in space exploration. I moved on to what would it take to be an astronaut. It turned out it required the same subjects. That was a time so long ago when being technical was the way to get into space exploration, and there really wasn't another avenue. I mean, this is right around the late 1950s and early 1960s. And even today, if you want to be a NASA astronaut, you need a technical degree. And so that whole route was closed off for me. Not really. I mean, if I'd wanted to buckle down and really do those things, I could have, but I didn't really want to. I wanted to find another path.
Who was von Braun back in the day? Was he the Elon of the time? Because I'm just thinking, like, today I have two teenagers here at home. So I'm just thinking, what if they wrote well, you don't write letters anymore these days. What if they wrote an email to Elon? Would this be comparable?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, von Braun was the towering figure of American rocketry. We all knew the story that he had worked for the German government, and that some of the rocket scientists in Germany had been captured by the Soviets. And I think the story was that he and his colleagues found the American lines and turned themselves in. And quite honestly, the fact that he worked for the Nazis, and I guess I don't know that he was a Nazi myself, but it was kind of irrelevant to us at that time. we didn't really delve that deeply into his background. So he was the one. And the other thing you have to understand is that the initial effort to launch an American satellite, the initial efforts all failed. They all failed on TV. And for some reason, the first effort had been given to the Navy, of all people, of all branches. And everybody kind of, I wouldn't say laughed at it, but the first effort kind of lifted off the launch pad and just fell back and blew up. And they finally turned it over to von Braun, and he launched the first American satellite. And then eventually he was given oversight of the Apollo program. So I think it would be like writing to Elon, I suppose.
We are experiencing quite a bit of a space enthusiasm, a building up of a space enthusiasm these days. So we're gearing up toward leaving our planet at some point. So I'm just wondering, considering what's happening in Elon's ballpark with Starship and what Jeff Bezos does and what the Chinese do, etc. All this momentum, is this comparable as a topic in society to back in the day, the days of Wernher von Braun, of the Apollo days, of the early Apollo days?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar. I think it's important to understand, if you're not an American, what a shock it was when Sputnik launched. The Soviet Union had said they were going to do it as part of a UN International Geophysical Year. But the United States, nobody believed it. And the United States had a very patronizing view of the Soviet Union. And it was absolutely shocking that they did that first. And also, it was clear that the ICBM that put Sputnik in orbit could also reach the United States. And suddenly, there was this sinking feeling that we were behind. And we had to do everything we could to catch up. Actually, I've said this before, the Soviet Union did me a big favor, because the school I went to in Mississippi, everything was upgraded. There were advanced classes suddenly available. And it was just a far better academic environment, because the focus was on how did Soviet young people learn. And the conclusion was they were much more serious. And of course, they were more serious about math and science and all of that. But my education was upgraded dramatically in high school, in direct response to Sputnik. And then, then we kind of got over that because we put up a satellite or two. And then suddenly Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. And another shock. I mean, how did they do that? And the United States managed to send Alan Shepard on a suborbital hop, but it was kind of puny compared to an orbital mission. So there was this feeling, it was really like there was an existential threat, because the Soviet Union and the United States were contending for supremacy on the Earth, and this became a proxy war, really. A war without casualties, but a war nevertheless.
It's interesting to see that today we have that proxy war on multiple angles, from multiple angles. We have the Chinese entering the stage next to the Russians. And still, it's interesting that this positive momentum that you were just mentioning, that education geared up toward, or in order to counterbalance that influence. This is not happening today, interestingly enough. So do you have any interpretation for this?
Well, as far as the United States goes, well, first of all, the interest in space exploration is far greater today than it was then, in the sense that we now have commercial space flight. We also have many more spacefaring nations than we did. In those days, it was 2 countries, period, full stop. Now there are other countries that have that capability. And one thing I notice is that the American government has decided we're going to have another space race. It's going to be us against the Chinese. It's going to be to the moon. It's remarkably similar in attitude. And I don't know, it may reach the point where it will begin to exert an influence on American society. I mean, I'm all about international cooperation off-world. And I don't know if you know this, Markus. Did you know that President Kennedy did not want a space race?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay. This is a good story for everyone to hear. President Kennedy, from the beginning, wanted to do a joint mission to the moon. He wanted to cooperate. And he approached Nikita Khrushchev very early on with that idea. And Khrushchev said, no, we're so far ahead of you. There's no point in cooperating with you. And then Kennedy revved up the American program and made it clear we were in it to win if there were no cooperation. And after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we faced each other with nuclear missiles for about 13 days, everybody realized the Cold War was getting out of hand, and the Soviets got a little more interested in it. Plus, the United States had done a lot and was potentially pulling ahead. And the Soviet Union was more open to cooperation. And then, unfortunately, as it's more than just unfortunately, tragically, President Kennedy was assassinated. That was the end of the cooperation. So from there, it just went back to being a competition. But he made a speech at the UN publicly calling for a joint mission, even a multinational mission to the moon. Well, most people just never heard about that. And now we're repeating the old race idea. And it will definitely galvanize the American space program, because when it happened in the 60s, it did galvanize the program. I mean, humans are competitive in many ways. Nations are competitive. And so...
And competitiveness can be beneficial also.
It can. Yeah. And I mean, it appears that we're going to go compete again. I would love it if the United States would propose a cooperative venture to the moon, just using the playbook of Kennedy. But I do think cooperation and competition can both benefit when you're dealing with technology. So there is one other point I would make, though. There's another similarity, in my opinion, between the 60s and today. I think China might be ahead of the United States in terms of going to the moon. I'm not sure of that. I don't have any inside knowledge, but they have been a slow and steady space power because they have a different system than we do. And, our space exploration tends to depend on who's in power, who the president is. It depends on what kind of technology we really can manage. So if it is important to beat the Chinese to the moon, I think the United States is going to have to really pull out all the stops. And as you may know, there's recently been a bump in the road because the Secretary of Transportation has opened up the contract for the lunar lander because SpaceX is behind.
Mm. It seems to me that what you are referring to, a collaborative effort, requires a substantial advanced understanding of civilization, an advanced understanding of who we are. And if we take a look at civilization today, it seems like we're still in cave people mode, dog eat dog mode. And so it seems like we are very slowly learning, if we're learning at all culturally. So maybe we will talk about the great filter topos and theory a little in a second, but maybe what we are heading toward is something that will decide as to if we will be, as a civilization, capable of joint efforts, joint massive endeavors at all. And the jury is still out, I think.
Well, that's why my work is so much of my time and effort is devoted to the overview effect, which is this remarkable view of the planet, which has been afforded to us by space efforts, where you see the planet as a single system with no borders, no boundaries, where everything is interconnected and interwoven. And it's a contradiction to how we behave. And the metaphor it's used a lot is spaceship Earth. And we actually find ourselves on an organic spaceship. I always attempt to point out to people, don't make a distinction between Earth and space. Don't say going into space. We are in space. We've always been in space, and we will always be in space. The Earth is our spacecraft. And if we destroy its capability to function, we're going to find ourselves adrift in a vast and lonely cosmos. The astronauts come back. They do their best to tell us this, and yet we continue to operate through a national perspective as if that reality can be ignored. And you're absolutely right. Ignoring it, to me, ignoring it is like ignoring gravity. Like, I don't like gravity. I don't want to obey gravity. Okay, walk out of a second-story window and say, I defy gravity. Well, it's kind of like if you want to pretend that resources are infinite, and if you want to focus on getting yours at the expense of everyone else, and if you don't think an earthquake on the other side of the world matters to you, well, keep thinking that way, but it's not really it's not really an evolutionary perspective. It's a dangerous perspective, in my opinion.
Speaking of the overview effect, I would like to go back in history with you, and I'm very, very grateful to have you in the studio because you're bringing such a wealth of historical knowledge with you, and this is a very exclusive moment for me.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
The first photographic representation of planet Earth was the legendary Earthrise photo, if I'm not mistaken, taken from an Apollo mission. And I'm wondering, when that photo got published in newspapers, do you recall the sentiment, how the media reacted, how society reacted to that?
Yeah, I mean, first I would say historically there had been other imagery of the Earth on uncrewed missions. There had been missions that had gone to the moon that had taken grainy, kind of black and white imagery. They had almost no impact. That image you're talking about is the first one that really had an impact. And once again, I think context is very important. I was at Oxford at the time. I was living in England. It had been a horrible year for Americans because Robert F. Kennedy had been assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. We had had violence in cities throughout the country. The president had actually had to call out the military to restore order. And the war in Vietnam was going poorly for the United States. And actually, President Johnson had announced he wasn't going to run again, which was actually seen as a good thing because he announced he would be working toward peace in Vietnam instead of war. But it was still, everything was happening unpredictably. We felt at sea. And then this remarkable thing happened because that mission, Apollo 8, as I understand it, wasn't meant to go to the moon. The United States was doing a number of orbital missions to get ready for the moon. But then NASA heard that the Soviets were going to do something spectacular. So just total risk-taking, they decided to send Apollo 8 around the moon. On the way, they turned around the camera and showed us the Earth. Again, not a great image, but I remember that. I remember like, oh, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. And then they did Earthrise, and that was an accident. There's a nice little video of it where they were looking at the moon, not the Earth, and they had been told to look at the moon and look for landing sites for Apollo 11. And then suddenly the Earth appeared, and everything went from there. And on Christmas Eve, they did a reading from Genesis, and the whole world watched it. There's a lot of debate, I think, as to how much impact it had. I have met people who've said their whole life was changed by that image. I would say my life was changed because I had been a very active activist in opposition to the war in Vietnam. And it had been a tough year, although it looked like things were turning around. It had been a hard year.
Tell me again, what year was that?
68.
68, okay.
Yeah. When Earthrise happened, I felt optimism again. It brought me up And then we began to anticipate Apollo 11 and that there was going to be a landing. It also became pretty clear the space race was over. It became pretty clear who was going to win. So we could kind of relax and just enjoy the spectacle of humans landing on the moon, which was really remarkable. And we haven't been really back to the moon since 1972. So another landing on the moon, regardless of who the people are, will be a remarkable event once again.
Will it be as remarkable?
I think so, because for one thing, I did a calculation a few years ago that only 17% of the people alive today were alive during Apollo. When you think about it, what happened between 1968 and 1972 was just an amazing period for the human species, because we had Apollo 8, went to the moon, didn't land. Apollo 9 was an orbital mission. Apollo 10 went very close to the lunar surface and they did not land. And then 11 landed. And we then had 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Look at all those missions to the moon. 13 didn't make it because something blew up on the way. But in 4 years, we did all that.
Easy.
And again, if you think of it as a human achievement, what a remarkable 4 years. But we've forgotten. I mean, Wernher von Braun built the Saturn V, which was the vehicle. My understanding is we have no idea how to even do that again, which is why we're kind of starting all over with new vehicles. And it was just a time when human beings were doing great things and terrible things. And I've given a talk where I've talked about the 60s were the best of times and the worst of times. And that's really, really true.
It was one of the greatest social experiments also, 68, 69, and then everything fell into pieces. So it could have, it was a bifurcating moment. It just took the other way.
Yeah, and I think that we could have something like that again, possibly another lunar mission, whether it's a race or not. It could have another catalyzing, inspiring impact. I believe that when the next crew lands on the moon, I think people will be glued to their television sets, their computers. I can't believe people won't be intrigued by that.
Just wondering, speaking of the healing effect of Earthrise, of this overview effect experienced for the first time. So it was healing because there was this arms race, the Cold War going on. Today, if we transfer what happened back then to today and compare it, today we, in addition to an arms race, in addition to multiple Cold Wars, we have the war, planet against humans, humans against planet, if you want to call it a war. So the climate change has come on top of what was experienced back in the day. So we have all the more reason and need to pull ourselves together, which we, for whatever reason, are or keep failing for whatever reason. So let's find out if or how we can make use of that wonderful observation that you first characterized with the Earth, with the overview effect. How can we make this healing potential available for people? Because, I mean, like, very few people will have the benefit to experience it. So what do we do with the rest?
Yeah, well, one thing to point out is Apollo gave an enormous boost to the environmental movement. Astronauts took a lot of videos and pictures that had an impact. Earthrise was the icon, but not the only picture. There's also a picture called the Blue Marble taken on the way either to the moon or from the moon by Apollo 17. All of these pictures reinforce the idea of one world, one planet, one ecosystem, and the fact that it's got to be treated thoughtfully. And now we're at a point today where that imagery is common, to some extent taken for granted. So your question is quite relevant. How do we use it? I think that first of all, we have to note that it's not just climate change. I mean, that's an environmental behavior that is really a response to our technological civilization and everything we're doing to the planet. And I think the only answer to your question is education. We have to give as many people as possible an experience of the overview effect. And I'm part of a movement called Bringing the Overview Effect Down to Earth. The firm belief we have is that if we can get close to the astronaut experience, it'll change behavior eventually. So I do support commercial spaceflight because I've interviewed quite a few of the commercial space travelers, and they do experience the overview effect. It does have an impact on them. I also think virtual reality can play a big role. VR, a lot of people with VR are attempting to engender the overview effect. They're very clear that's what they're trying to do. So that's to be supported. And then beyond that, it seems that it's like any educational challenge. It's important to think of ways to do it that aren't preachy.
Yeah.
One of the mistakes that social change people make is to preach. And I've seen studies, communication studies, that show the more you throw contrary information at people, the more it hardens their worldview against you. And I've been talking to numerous people lately about ways of communicating the overview effect without really being completely clear, and maybe not even using the term that I'm trying to teach you the overview effect. No. What's a story we can tell? How can we communicate it in a way that's interesting to people? We're in a race against time because we don't think about this, but the Earth can be a very unforgiving planet. 99% of all the species that ever existed here are gone. They're extinct. That's a remarkably sobering statistic. Humanity is not, we're not impervious to danger. So we have to communicate urgency is another part of it. That's important.
I'm wondering, maybe it's a shortcut I'm proposing here. I'm wondering what would happen if you managed to put Putin and Trump and Netanyahu and all the folks on a spacecraft and fly them around Earth. I'm wondering if they come back the same people with the same problems. I don't think so.
Well, astronauts have told me that they would love to see a summit conference in orbit. They don't think that the world leaders could behave the way they do if they had that experience. Unfortunately, the people you mentioned, given what it takes to put, let's say, Putin and Trump together, and the entourage that would be required and all that, it is unrealistic at this time. I have proposed in a paper I wrote, why don't we focus on lower level State Department people and world, corporate leaders, and why don't we do something we really could do? Because I think you really could put, let's say, a relatively high-level State Department official on a Blue Origin flight with a relatively high-level Russian member of parliament. Let's put it like that. And they would go down to Texas. They'd spend 2 or 3 days together, getting ready for the flight. Then the crews, the crews that go on Blue Origin don't have a lot of time together, but I've been told they do bond. They do come together in a way. And I'd like to see us start with some things we can do, which is to be more thoughtful about the commercial astronaut crews and put together people who maybe would never meet if you didn't do that. So I need to call a break because my computer needs to be charged.
Of course. No worries.
Quick break.
Of course. What a ride with part 1 of this two-parter. Part 1 was all about the history and the past. Imagine the story when Frank wrote that letter to Wernher von Braun. How special is that? And getting an answer from this person. I'm still wondering, maybe we should try it at some point. Would Elon write back to a kid, a 12-year-old, when it comes to advice about career choices? I find that a very, very interesting insight into how we deal with one another, and that a guy like Wernher von Braun replies to an unknown 12-year-old. This gives me a lot of room for thought. And so the next episode will be all about looking into the future, because the overview effect, as great and insightful it has been for astronauts, we will need to find a way how to make use of that overview effect to reach as many people on this planet as possible. In a planet in turmoil, a planet craving for answers, a planet craving for guidance. And so I believe maybe the only one who can hold that scepter when it comes to giving humanity guidance is not a human being, is not a king, is not a leader of a corporation. No, it's planet Earth itself. And this is what we're going to talk about. How can we make use of that insight that the overview effect may save or hold the key towards saving us all and getting us back into a brighter future on a global scale. So thank you everyone for listening. As always, if you want to chat with me or send over a message, drop me a note at podcast@spacewatch.global. Well, yeah, and thanks for listening. It's truly appreciated that you're still sticking around. All right, then. Talk to you in 2 weeks from now. Bye-bye.